Well, that's what I was wondering.
No, you're coming in loud and clear now.
Excellent.
Okay, we could really use a second note taker. I count as a third. I mean, like 1/3, not a third note taker. Thanks, Danny. So we've got Danny and Dean that will be taking notes, and I'll try and help where I can as well.
And Danny, did you find the hedge doc so you can at least type into the same doc as Dean?
Don't know if he's on mute.
He says yes. Okay, great. I think we're good to go.
Yep.
All right, welcome. It is top of the hour. Let's get things going. This is the session for SCIM, the SCIM meeting today, and I assume by this point everybody has seen the note well. If not, please give this a quick read. And we expect everybody to follow the note well throughout the session, as always. If you are joining remotely, please do use a headset. It really helps keep echo away and it makes you sound better to everybody. And please mute if you are not actively speaking. Queue logistics, please, everybody, including people in person, please use the Meet Echo tool to join the queue before jumping up to the microphone. We will be watching the queue and calling on people to talk. And again, if you're here in person, reminder about masks are required unless you are actively speaking. I suppose that means I can take mine off right now, but I'm already wearing it, so
No,
whatever.
Chairs are required to wear.
Even while speaking.
Yeah.
All right.
Once you get up there.
That's the no mask. Great. Okay, I think that's the logistics.
Yep.
Please be respectful, of course, as always, according to the code of conduct, which conveniently has an RFC number, which is great. So, agenda for today, let's see, we've got note takers. Thank you very much. We'll collect the meeting minutes to post them after the meeting. You can find the slides of all the presentations already linked from the meeting page if you would like to load them on your computer to be able to browse through them. And I assume if you are currently seeing and hearing me, you've already found the web page with the Meet Echo tool, but the QR code is over there for the in-person people to join. We've got a packed agenda, so let's not waste any more time. And I guess jump right in unless you have anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's the agenda bash. So unless anybody has issues with the current agenda, we can go ahead and proceed. Go ahead, Dean.
Just one quick item with the agenda. On the cursor-based pagination, it's myself, Danny, and Anjali Segal.
Okay.
Somehow her name got dropped. Oh.
My bad.
No problem.
Apologies for that.
Thank you. I'll give credit where it's due.
You want me to amend it? I can do it after the meeting.
We've amended it in the notes.
Okay, thanks. As long as it's in the notes. Okay, so going once, going twice. All right.
Hello.
Elliot, you're in the queue?
Yeah. I would like to bash the agenda. I know I'm going to need a little more than 5 minutes, so I propose, if people don't mind, to bum 1 minute off of each of the presenters, if you guys don't mind, from the others. I'll need about 8.
We actually have a little bit of slop, Elliot, so we'll give you a couple minutes from any other business.
Okay, thank you.
But in my defense, you did request for 5 minutes. But yes, we will give you more time as time allows, right? All right, so hearing no other, oh, did you drop Elliot from the queue? That's my job, sorry. That's my job. I'll get him off the queue. Oh, he's off the queue. Okay, so we can go ahead and get started. So, Paolo and Pam?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Aaron, I don't know that we have slides for you.
No, we don't. We are just
Okay.
going to have a recap. So no slides there. I don't see Pam online, so I think, she's here. Hi,
She's
Pam.
on.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm just going to share, and I think we are more or less ready to share it with all of you, the work that me and Pam have been done on the GitHub. So let me just share, and I think we already went through it in one of the calls before, but we'll go through it, and we are looking for feedback, especially people that implement scheme already. Okay, so I ask for screen share.
Paolo, is the document on GitHub somewhere?
No. So it's in the private GitHub of Pam, and we promised to share it before. We did it yet. Sorry for that. So I'll share right
Yeah,
now, and then after that
okay.
we'll share with everyone. Okay.
Okay.
Can I share my screen?
Yes, so you need to unshare?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you should be able to request share.
Okay, let me try again. Ask for screen share.
So you should be able to approve. Let's see.
Here we go.
You got it?
Mhm.
All right.
Click on the deck to share. There is something wrong.
I think it's just taking time because it says a new deck is being shared.
Yeah, but I'm trying to share the screen.
Oh, I think that's a different button.
Yeah, you have to hit the screen button, not the file button.
Okay. Dismiss. Wait. Screen request. I ask for screen request. Let me cancel it. Do it again. Okay. So ask for screen share screen. I did it. Should have a request.
Yeah. Oh. Do you see where it went?
I granted it.
Where's the button?
So
Yes.
it'll show up above.
Okay.
with a big
Perfect.
check mark. I had it.
Perfect. So right now, yeah. Okay, so this is what we'll be sharing. Maybe let me increase a little bit the font, but
Yeah,
is
you're
it
gonna have
better?
to blow it up. Nope. Oh, now it's better.
Okay. Okay, so very quickly, so that we give some minutes to Elliot. So introductions, standard thing, the different terminology, and in here from a terminology, we introduced the concept. If you remember, in a couple of calls ago, we shared those diagrams with the different actors or functions that exist. So we have the resource creator, resource updater, resource manager, resource subscriber, the resource objects, and the resource attributes. Okay, this will be the basis for us, right? Now, a couple of other concepts that we introduce, and then talking about the components and architecture that we have there. And then we go to the different constructs, right? Roles and constructs. So the resource objects, the objects that we are going to have in, and again, we moved away a little bit. That was our idea, to move the way a little bit from users and groups, because as we see on the work that Elliot is doing now in SCIM, and the objects can be anything, can be a device, can be a user, can be a group, can be whatever, right? So we try to go away from anything that has to do with the user and groups that was really the focus before. So we have the resource objects, and those resource objects will have resource attributes, right? And then we are talking about the different actors. So who creates the information, who updates the information, who manage all the information, the different sources, and who subscribes to the information. We keep the concept of external resource creators, okay, that exist in the original RFC. So now after that, we try to give a little bit overview on how we can bring everything together. We have the resource managers that are going to get the information from the creators and updaters, and we have the resource subscribers. Something that is missing in here, and we create a use case, is that the resource manager can talk to other resource managers. Okay, and this line is missing in here that we need to fix that part. Now, after that, what we try to do is the mechanism that is behind the resource objects and the resource attributes, on how in resource objects, how you create the different attributes, and that some attributes will be, we go through a discussion that we had before on mutability, that some resource creators and updaters will be able to read write attributes, and some will only be able to read. Then we go to the section on triggers, and in here we keep the original triggers. There was 3 of them, apart from the SSO that we decided to remove. So we keep the original 3 triggers on the creation of a SCIM resource, update of SCIM resource, and delete of SCIM resource. But at the same time, we also add the triggers that was proposed by Nancy and Phil, where it's more about the notification that you subscribe to something, right? So you have something there, but you have the same functions in the other way around. So we have the 6 different triggers that we can use in SCIM. After that, we start the use case, and this is the section that I think it was more missing before, because before what we had was just trying to describe the one-to-one relationship, the client server, and that was it. What we see in reality, after all these years of implementation, is that we have more complex environments, and we try to capture that. So we try to capture the most simple one that we had in the past, that we had the resource creator, resource manager, and at the same time is the updater, that have multiple resource subscribers. So the typical client service, where you have a client and a service provider. This is the most common one. But after that, we start to see other scenarios. So for instance, the resource manager, resource creator, and updater can start to receive information from an external resource manager. For instance, when we have those piece of software that gathers information from an AD or an LDAP and push it to a SCIM client, okay? So after that, we start to get from there. So each one of these use cases build on top of the other. So for instance, the 3.3, we are saying that now, for instance, if we have, for instance, an HR application, they will be in charge for a different, for the objects or for some attributes of the objects. And they will be talking to the resource manager, that it can also be creator, updater, and subscriber, that talks to other, that provides that information to resource subscribers. And after that, we'll have the concept of the external resource creator that also brings to the BICS. Then after that, we have the resource subscriber. For instance, the typical example of a Slack or a Zoom or a WebEx that is authority or should create an attribute for the user, identifying their communication ID, like their email for the communication. At that point, they are the ones that are going to create that information, and that information needs to be in the resource manager, but needs also to be in the HR application, right? So in here, we are starting to see many ops, not only what scheme was designed, the client service, but many different interactions that describes the use case on how scheme can be used. And at some point, we arrive to the most complex scenarios where we have multiple resource managers. So for instance, let's say that you have an Okta, you have an Azure, then you have many applications that subscribe that information, and then you have sources of information for the resource object that comes from the AD on-premise. So all of this brings to this use case. Now, what we are struggling, to be honest, and we need the feedback from many, is that we thought, okay, all of this is okay, but we need to bring it down to the RFCs that we have today, right? The 44 and the 43. So now we need to bring it back to the 44 and 43. We need to say, okay, so all these use cases that we described before, what does it mean from that architecture, simple architecture where we are a client and a server, right? So how would we bring it back, and what will be the components that translate to this concept that we are bringing in here? Okay, and that's what we are struggling, and right now we are still discussing on how this is working. We are very glad to have more feedback. We are still figuring it out. How can we make it very clear on how the use cases can be implemented based on the 43 and 44?
Okay, so Paolo, you're at time.
Yes, and that's it.
So I encourage you, well, I think not encourage, well, okay, I'll encourage you to post the link to the GitHub so that you can get the feedback and start that discussion. So post it on the mail list for the kind of feedback that you're looking for and the issues that you need help for resolution. Okay?
Pam, did I forgot something? Anything to add in here?
Nope, that's it.
All right. We need to keep moving. Next up is, who's next up? Phil.
Phil.
Can everybody hear me?
Yay, yes. And we can see you.
Phil, would you like to drive the slides, or do you want to just say next slide?
I'll just say next slide.
Okay.
Let's not jinx it. Okay, next slide. So this is just an update, short update. The draft now finally has security and privacy considerations and an IANA section. There's a couple more things to deal with. We'll get to that in a slide. For those who haven't looked at this before, SCIM events define a series of events that can be shared as security event tokens, which is specified by RFC 8417 and transferred by a number of mechanisms, two of them which are RFC 8935 and 8936, would describe how a SCIM event publisher can either push events to a defined endpoint or provide a service endpoint such that a client that's behind a firewall can pull to the SCIM publisher to get the stream of events. And that poll-based event can be done using long polling, which gives you real-time delivery either way. So your choice of protocol really depends on whether you're dealing with an administrative requirement that a firewall can't be breached, so you can't push to the client, to the receiver. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, we added privacy, security, and IANA sections. For privacy and security, it basically is building on the security and privacy considerations of 89, 35, 36, and 8417, as well as SCIM itself. And the other commentary is you're sharing information between parties that have already agreed to share information via the SCIM protocol to begin with. So most of the cases we're not opening up. And we also have the choice where there's a more arm's length relationship where you can have just notifications that certain attributes have changed, and then the receiver of the event can call back and ask for that information, which is then when you can have an authorization check to see if your access policy allows certain attributes to be seen. So that's what's sort of laid out in the spec. We did some revising of the spec in order to conform with the OpenID shared signals framework, which requires use of the subject identifier spec, which is just nearing RFC completion. I've put in the name of the draft, and it's just in the RFC editor queue now. So by the time we publish, it will also be in RFC. So it's good to get that in. That also opens up some flexibility where we don't just have to use SCIM IDs and external ID. We could include in the subject identifier an email address or a username, something that's unique that the parties can agree on. So that's talked about in the spec. Section 2 continues to define the 4 classes of events. If you're wondering where the formatting came from, when we send the full transaction, it really follows the SCIM bulk definition in the original 7644 spec. So you have the choice of either sending a list of attributes or the actual data of the SCIM transaction, which is defined by the bulk endpoint. So we're not defining anything new there. Then we have feed control events. If you have a case where you don't want the entire server sending events about everything in the server, you can add and remove subjects to the feed. This is part of shared signals and how they do things. So we're supporting that. Provisioning events is basically the SCIM CRUD operations. Signal events are high-level events that people want to indicate, such as an authentication factor was changed or a password was reset that comes from the SCIM system. Async events was mentioned by Paolo, which is to indicate some long-running request that's now completed. I know at my previous employer, they had some things that take 20, 30 minutes and the client wanted to know when it finished. So that helps support that case. Next slide. Section 3 talks more about how and when to secure events, when to use plain text JWTs, when to do JWS signing or encryption, and what's appropriate. You can do the can't do security, do a lot of security thing and end up with too much security. So I'm talking about the layers that you have. You've got TLS, you've got the authorization, you've got the signature of the event. And the signature of the event not only gives you the authenticity beyond what TLS already told you, it's also useful if over time you want to verify that an event that was sent a long time ago that's in your local database was actually signed by the issuing authority. And then encryption is for improved confidentiality. If for some reason you need end-to-end encryption to where the end event processor is receiving it. So that's all in there, and the reasons why and why not are there. There were some comments before that 8935 and 8936 don't provide recovery. I think one of the things I sort of realized is that some people are thinking of classic LDAP servers and techniques that were used with changelog. And that was, I want to do a recovery and look at the entire changelog and rebuild my server. That's a very different thing when we're talking about point-to-point coordination, where I have a network of SCIM service providers on one side and a database or a directory on the other side. And they're unlike infrastructures, which is, again, part of the cross-domain thing. But what we're talking about is recovering of the sequence of events that goes on. One of the things the SEC Events Working Group decided was that long-term recovery is up to the receiver of the event. So the way the protocols work is they support short-term recovery only, but they don't mandate it that short-term. It could be infinite recovery as well. But the real idea is that once you acknowledge an event, the publisher is no longer required to provide recovery of that event. So the idea is to ensure that an event was successfully transferred, and then the receiver stores it in its database, and the long-term recovery that it needs in its infrastructure is supported by the receiver. That's great because it also means the receiver doesn't have any architecture or design motives impinged on it. You have a great point of demarcation between the service providers. Salesforce can't tell on a hypothetical Salesforce can't tell hypothetical Microsoft what to do, and vice versa. You're getting notification of the events, and you do with the events what you want to do, and you retain them for as long as you want. So that's the kind of recovery that this supports. So next slide.
Phil, you've only got about a minute left.
Yeah, okay. Couple more then. So I mentioned these, that this is just following on. That's quite natural. I'll just go to the next slide. There is an IANA issue that Amanda just brought up for me from the IANA team, that there is no registry for set events. For some reason, the SEC Events Group decided not to do that. So we have a choice where we could work with the broader community and establish an event registry. That'll be controversial, I think, because the SEC Events Group didn't want one. We could flip this around so it's URN, IETF, param, SCIM, and then event, because there is a registry under SCIM, and we could register them there. Or we could just argue there's no need for it. We've published it in the RFC, and it's just an abstract URI, and I'm not sure how happy the IANA people will be with it. My suggestion is we'll just set up a namespace under SCIM that we can administer for ourselves. Even though we might never change it, I don't know. If people see future events, we could add to it, or somebody else could add to it. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts. That was the main feedback. And then the last slide, I'll just go to that real quick. I'm working on a couple of implementations. There's, as far as set transfer, there are a number of commercial implementations, but a public open source one is the sharedsignals.guide website, and I should be publishing one too called Go Signals. And that should give us more of an interrupt. In the case of the SCIM events, these are just registering event schemas, and so the actual complex part being protocol is already implemented, it's already running, but it would be nice to do that. The i2scim.io server, I haven't released it yet, but it's already been doing replication events for quite some time using another protocol, but that all works. So The signaling nature of SCIM events is sufficient for people to set that up if that's what they want to do. So that's it. And we can take questions now or later, depending on the time.
Great, thanks. We don't have much time, but Elliot, did you want to say something really quick?
Yes, I just wanted to ask the question, what would the IANA policy be for the registry?
We'd either follow the model we had with the SCIM schema registry, and we just create a SCIM event registry. I'm not sure how much value there is in actually establishing a registry. I would I'm going to talk to Amanda and see what they recommend here. And that's sort of my feeling on it. The quickest way is to just sort of do a SCIM one rather than do that. It has been done before. We could establish a registry for all security events, but that requires a broader input and may slow us down quite a lot.
Okay, we need to keep moving because we're 5 minutes over the agenda time.
Sorry about that.
All right, next up, cursor-based pagination.
Hi, I'm Dean Sachs, and there's Danny. Danny? And maybe we have Anjali as well.
I'm not sure that microphone that Dean is at is active, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, you have to turn it on.
Better.
Tap on it.
Nothing.
Uh-oh.
Use one over there.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
What's that?
Oh, wait,
there
there
it
we go.
goes.
All right, a few mic problems here. All right, so as I said, I'm Dean Sachs. We've got Danny and Anjali on the line here, and we are going to talk about the work we've been doing on cursor-based pagination. I'm going to let the smart people in the room, Danny and Anjali, spend most of the time talking. I'll try and coordinate from here in the room, but let me turn it over to those folks. And Aaron, if you don't mind advancing the slides for us.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Danny Zollner. I've talked on this subject before. So first, just a quick sort of administrative thing. The cursor-based pagination draft was written by Matt Peterson back in, I think, like 2017. He has had a change in employment and he doesn't have time to work on this anymore. So he has handed it off to a group of enthusiasts listed on this slide. So that would be myself, Dean, Anjali, and also David, who is not here tonight. And then next slide, please. So the main thing that we wanted to address, with our time today, is some of the feedback on the call for adoption and how we plan to address it. So we have a couple of slides just pointing to specific concerns that were raised and the changes that are going to happen as a result of that to the draft. So there were concerns about denial of service possibility. I think it was mostly in the context of if the state or the snapshot of a response was being held by the SCIM service provider, that a malicious actor could open one or more cursors and try and keep them alive for a long time and exhaust the memory or storage or whichever of that server. Similarly, there was also similarly-ish. There was also a concern raised in discussion at some point about, and this again is sort of tying to that like statefulness concept, that if implementers were to lock resources that were included in a page that was being returned from being changed, that would be a security issue, as a bad actor could lock the mutability of a set of resources in a cursor and use that to prevent things such as deactivation of a user when they should otherwise be deactivated. Say they're being terminated or something. So the response to that that'll go into the draft. There'll be explicit guidance that the cursor-based pagination is not expected to be stateful. I think Dean and Anjali, keep me honest. I think right now it's the wording is effectively that I think we say it's not expected to be stateful. We don't use like a capital should or a must or anything in the wording at this point. I think mostly for a more ease of adoptability, I guess. So that if the underlying data store, if somebody needs a snapshot, actually is going to be stateful, and it's not a burden, but actually it would be a burden the other way to do a stateless snapshot of the set of resources. Snapshotting, sorry, the list of resources, but not any other data about them, like attribute values. But anyways, it's sorry, it's very late here. Yeah, so we're gonna say you're not expected to be stateful, and then God, I'm sorry, I'm running on fumes. Dean or Anjali, could you finish that thought for me?
Sure. So yeah, so in our draft, we are going to add the section which explicitly states that cursor-based pagination is not expected to be stateful. And we know a few implementations that if it's using restfulness, then it is expected to be stateless. So with that consideration in mind, since we are not proposing that underlying implementations would lock any resources, the DDoS security concern becomes invalid. Yep. To the next slide. Additional requirements for change detection or delta query capabilities were added. So our response to that is that change detection delta query is not a requirement, but a valuable complementary functionality for large client server pull activity. And we're not saying that cursor-based pagination is a prerequisite or mandatory for implementing change or delta queries. Pagination in general is an alternative to index. Cursor-based pagination in general is an alternative to index-based paginations for implementers whose underlying databases do not support by default index-based pagination and requires a translation. So cursor-based pagination provides an alternative mechanism. But we do specify in our updated text what are the differences between the behavior of index-based pagination versus cursor-based pagination when we are paginating through large data set. So next slide, please. So this is essentially the text that we propose to add in our next version of the draft. We have not published a new version yet, but once we have the feedback on this text, we would definitely add it and publish it.
Anjali, this text is in GitHub, correct?
Not yet, I believe. It's here
Okay.
only. Yeah. Do you guys want me to go through it or?
I don't know that you need to read through it, given the
Yeah.
time. I don't know how many slides you have left, but.
I think this is the last.
There's one more slide.
One more, yeah.
Okay.
Anjali, I'd suggest we put this text on the GitHub issue so that that way it becomes available to everyone to read, and we can drop a note on the mailing list as well to point people to that issue.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to take questions right now. You've got Philip on the queue, or if you want to wait till you're done.
I think we can take a question now if you're okay with that, Anjali.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Philip.
Hi, I'm just looking at the text there and I'm kind of confused that isn't the point of paging that you want to get through the entire data set without it changing underfoot. If you're going to allow it to change, isn't that contradictory?
Contradictory, sorry, to what?
Well, the reason we're here doing a paging spec was that you didn't want the data to change while you're paging through it, which is what the current spec does. But that first paragraph you have says that the data can continue to change. So the objective seems to be contradictory. That's what I'm confused about.
I think what the initial draft's proposal was to provide an alternative mechanism to index-based pagination, not essentially uh, targeting that we do not want to uh, allow resources to change. Cursor-based pagination in general, if the underlying resources are being changed, it does not lead to the issues that index-based pagination creates, which is skipping of records or essentially duplicating some of the records. So in that mechanism, it provides a different behavior. And second reason why we are providing an alternative to index-based pagination is that underlying databases may not implement index-based pagination by default. So in order to support index-based pagination, such implementers would have to do a translation layer and which requires scans of large data set and building those indexes, which adds to the complexity.
I'll have to leave it to the others to do that because I don't know that that would set up their objective, which was to reconcile all the records between two servers using paging.
Okay, yours.
Hi, this is Joris. So I think for cursor-based pagination, don't you still need to save the state of the indexes that you got from the query? So I think there is something you need to, like something that's needs to be stateful here, I would say. The results, the actual data that the indexes give to you may change, maybe stateless, but the result set that you get should be stateful in my understanding. Maybe that's just something you need to clarify in the text.
Yeah, I think the text needs refinement. What you just said is the intended goal, if I understood you correctly. The set of results returned is should be captured in a state. Any given like attribute value though can be a like point in time when you load that specific page, rather than everything having to be snapshotted. You have to be very beginning when you pull the first page out of 1,000 or 10,000 pages. So we can refine the text.
Yes.
And I think Anjali said it as well. Remember, if you look in the intro to this document, what you'll see is that the intent was to provide an alternative to index-based pagination. The intent of the doc was not to provide a mechanism to synchronize large data sets across client and server, but to provide an alternative to that index-based pagination when the underlying database does not support that mechanism natively. Anjali, should we move on to the next slide?
Sounds like it sounds like the takeaway here is there should be a small revision to this text to clarify the type of stateful statelessness that you actually intended. Is that correct?
I think that sounds
basically
correct, Aaron.
what Danny and
Yes.
Joris were saying.
Yes.
Okay, great. Noted.
I'm typing.
Great.
Yeah, and so final slide, we will have a new version coming out shortly that will have a revised version of the text from the previous slide, as well as text on the security issues mentioned in the previous slides as well. And then I just also wanted to call out that I think somewhere in the last week or so, there was an email to the SCIM mailing list, and somebody from the HTTP DIR working group has reviewed the draft and provided a lot of helpful feedback. So we will hold on reviewing and incorporating that into a V2 or a further version, as we're pretty close to at least having some new substantive updates that we covered in these slides.
That's good.
Great. Tony, did you want to say your chat comments on the mic?
No, I'll just leave them in the chat.
Okay.
I don't think we have time to go over a lot of these. So.
Okay.
All right. I don't see any more questions in the queue, Aaron.
Don't see anybody else in the queue?
Nobody else.
Okay. Anjali, Danny, I think that's all we've got for the day, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Yep. Okay.
We'll let you
Thank
two
you,
go back to
everyone.
bed then.
Oh, we got the 4
All
minutes
right.
back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're back on track. All right, Elliot, you are on.
Very good. I appreciate people helping me out on time. So this is an update to draft Shahzad SCIM devices. This is work by Hassan, Iqbal, Muhammad, Shahzad, and myself. Hassan and Muhammad are affiliated with NCSU. I'm at Cisco. Next slide, please. Okay, the goal really is to automate all or most of provisioning of devices using basic CRUD operations. The means, this is all review, so I'm going to go pretty quickly, is a set of SCIM extensions that enable device provisioning. There's also a SCIM extension that permits the device manager endpoint registration. I'll go through that flow a little bit in this time because I think it wasn't clear the last time. And then obviously we're reusing the core schema, and that includes SCIM groups. And they turn out to be important, and I'll discuss that at a future time. Next slide. So here's the basic model. That green line where it says provisioning SCIM is really, it can actually be many different parties. It can use certificate-based authentication or user-based authentication, depending on the type of party that is. The object that's being provisioned is a device all the way on the left for purpose of network access. The sort of capabilities that are required of the enterprise network on the left will depend on the type of device. So for Wi-Fi, for instance, the only thing that's needed is for the device to get onboarded. For BLE, actually, you need to create a data path and a control path, which is the red line and the blue line here. And the extension schema is defined essentially a device control mechanism using either HTTP or MQTT, and a device telemetry schema. This is the device saying, "Hey, and this is also events." So it may be that the device on the left is, for instance, a heart monitor. And what's being produced is either analog waveform information that's been digitized, or simply periodic digital updates, depending on where the patient is. And so that information would come across on the blue line. These two red line and blue line endpoints are defined in the schema. So that's roughly speaking the approach. Next slide, please. Actually, I'll just pause on the previous slide for just a moment. Does everybody have a pretty comfortable understanding as to what we're attempting? Is there any concern? If there are clarifying questions here, I would take them. Okay, moving right along. So how do we do this? How many schemas are defined? We define a core device schema. It actually has very little in it. Just a display name, an admin state, and an optional MUD URL so that you can describe what sort, you can point to an SBOM for the device, a software bill of materials. You might point to access controls if you want. That's up to the manufacturer. The BLE extension contains various authentication mechanisms, support for MAC address randomization through IRKs. And also now, I think there's a change in the schema that also will support sort of basic offset-based privacy, which is sort of pseudo-privacy, but that's what a lot of BLE people do. And we're not trying to fix BLE, we're just trying to document how to get the darn thing onboarded and how to communicate with it. The other extension is Wi-Fi Alliance Easy Connect, which basically is a device provisioning protocol. And this goes with, basically this is just about getting Wi-Fi access mostly. And for Wi-Fi access, this is just about, you need to have trusted introduction, and that's what the QR code provides, an ECC, a public key, and a little bit more information. We've done sort of the same thing for Zigbee. And then we provide endpoint applications. I'll talk about that in a moment. The other schema that we're pondering, we haven't quite done this yet, is for Matter. The reason we haven't quite gotten around to Matter yet is because Matter is not really yet enterprise capable from my perspective. When it is, there's a natural extension to be done there. The endpoint applications extension, if you go back to the previous slide, just to highlight that, it's those red lines and blue lines, and it provides for authorization tokens so that the device control and data receiver on the right are authorized to connect to the gateway to receive this information. And it is the gateway. The gateway in this slide is indeed the SCIM server. So that's, we can move forward again. And again. So the big changes since London, based on Phil's input and others, we're just using the SCIM data schema description in the draft now. We've moved the OpenAPI schema to the appendix. There's a lot, I did a lot of formatting quote improvements. I ended up folding some JSON examples, and God, that's gross, but you know, it's done in the core SCIM, so what do you do? That's something that we can't fix in this working group. There are some nice pretty tables with all the attributes laid out in terms of their properties in nice skimmy fashion. And we've updated the examples. Next slide. So we're now also working on some open source for this to release. I'm not sure the timing of that, but it will surely be before October and maybe before July for people to play with. The open source will be client code primarily. So the client code will be focused on how do you provision a device into a network. We might also do some server code. We haven't quite gotten that far, but we want to make sure that there's at least client SDK out there. The specification is, you know, sort of beginning to mature. We're not making a lot of changes to the text now. So we sort of like the working group to think about taking this on and maybe calling for adoption. And along those lines, if you are interested in improving the draft, we'd like to see your inputs, because we don't claim expertise. And I would really love for the cursor people to help me out a little bit. And also Phil, in terms of events, really we're using MQTT for events, but there might be some things we can learn from YouTube there. And that's it.
So Elliot, did you get feedback from the draft version 0?
We did. We got some feedback from, most of the feedback was around the form that, the form of the schema. And so we reacted to that and basically used the SCIM approach. And we also had some conversations with various big players as you who can speak for themselves if they wish to, but I'm not going to mention their names.
I can't remember whether, I have no excuse. I can't remember if you had just updated the draft, Elliot.
We updated it. Well, I think in November we submitted it for its first round of review, basically for people to get a look at it. And now we've taken comments, and so we sort of like to do a working group call for adoption. That should either bring people in or repel them, depending on how you look at the draft.
Well, and that's the reason why I asked if anybody had provided comments on the previous one was to see if we needed to solicit volunteers to review as we do the call for adoption.
I would love to take volunteers for that. Always. I don't think you did that the last time. I would love to have additional volunteers. I know Phil took a look at it, and I appreciate that, Phil. And I think one or two other people also did as well.
Okay. Well, we can go ahead and do the call for adoption, Elliot. We can start it. We could do, given this is an IETF week, we may just do like a 3-week.
Yeah, or just start it next week.
Or
Yeah, I would say start it next week.
Um,
You guys have plenty to do in
but-
Japan already.
So basically, we need at least 3 people to chime in on readiness for the draft. So I can either ask for volunteers explicitly now or just rely on the honor system. And if we don't, then I will do it on the mail list to force the issue.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so with that, we actually have 3 minutes left for any other business. So this is open mic time. Does anybody have any other issues, topics that they want to raise and discuss before we close? Going once? Going twice? I won't say Bueller. All right, I think we give you a whole 2.5 minutes back and let the remote people sleep. Go ahead.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. Make sure you scanned in if you didn't already, if you weren't in the queue.
All right, thank you, everyone, especially those who are dialing in remote at an ungodly hour. Enjoy the rest of the week. I'm looking at the chat.
How's it going?
Okay, good to see you here.